Welcome. And today I have with me Sasquatch from Raid Guild. Could you please introduce yourself and what you do?
First off, thanks for having me, Sarah. Pleasure to be on. I am a cleric with Great Guild, which is a fancy way to say account manager. And I've had the pleasure of working with Sarah over the last couple projects and here to talk about, my journey.
So, for those who don't know, what is Raid Guild?
Great Guild is a collection of mercenaries, aka freelancers, various types, designers, UI UX, front and back end, ability devs, and a handful of other choice categories, and we all are gathered together by a loose structure, a flat organization that we share parts in. This is a way to create a decentralized dev shop or agency to help share kind of the overhead that comes with running an agency.
And you said that you work as a cleric or an account manager. So, for those who don't know, Raid Guild has roles. These roles have a very RPG like names and they signify different jobs that you could do. So, what do you do on a day to day basis as an account manager?
The basic role from day to day is coordinating with the actual client. One thing about Rego is we basically take on work from outside sources. We work on anything within the Web3 landscape, but mainly focused on the Ethereum ecosystem. And our clients will come to us with projects. It could be just a piece of the project, like an audit for some smart contract code, or it could be, a full-fledged project build where we just have a founder with an idea come to us to help realize that vision. And so my day is just talking with the founder or the client to ensure that we're meeting their expectations and keep them abreast of any hiccups or roadblocks, getting support to our technical team who's actually working on it, the raiders. There's another role within Raincoat called a monk, and they are the technical project manager. And there's a lot of bleed over from clerics to monks on most projects because most projects don't actually have enough complexity to warrant having both. So I see myself as a non-technical project manager as well.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I've again had the pleasure of working with you over the last few months, and I noticed that your job has like you're very busy and you're also jumping around different roles very often and doing it quite well. There's a lot of time management that goes into what you're doing and also communication skills, which from my experience as a developer and working with other people who are strictly devs, a lot of us really struggle in that area. Like we don't really know how to communicate with clients. We don't really know how to make sure that everyone's on the same page. I'm guilty of that a lot. How did you end up in Raid Guild and how did you pick your role?
Yeah, my entry into the space is not normal, I would say. I feel like most people that I talk to in the space came to this world through Web 2. So more of a changing of the structure underlying the industry rather than an entirely different industry. But I came in from the brewing industry. I was a brewer and I had been for 8 years before I joined Raid Guild. And I mainly joined because I needed something new to do. I had followed a project to Barcelona and Spain was hit pretty hard in 2020. And a year into the pandemic, I had reached out to a friend who is an OG member of Raid Guild. And we were just talking about life and work and what things are going on. And he suggested that I check it out, even though I have zero, zero technical experience with software development or even really the blockchain. I'd like mined a little bit back in 2013, but it was just as a lark. So I think I kind of rambled a bit, but that's how I found Raid Guild. And I think the second part of that was how to pick my role. And I think I just did what I could, which is I couldn't write code, didn't know design, but I could keep a calendar and talk to people and help people find solutions to their problems. And that is why I found myself taking on the Claire hat, or robe.
I'll go into a bit about how I started in this because I got introduced to crypto, well, just online. To be honest, I was living in a state where weed hadn't been legalized yet. And I just, I was a teenager and I went on a tour and figured out, you need to use Bitcoin. And that kind of got me introduced into what all of this is and the core, I would say, ideals of what crypto is. And I worked as a salesperson the majority of my life. I was either selling clothes or appliances. For a while, I was selling like online services. And I feel like at a certain point, I wanted to make a change. And it was also during COVID, like in 2019, I had a little bit of web development skills. I saw it as an opportunity. Like we were getting a stimulus from the government. I was in the UK at the time. So they were paying like it was called a furlough. So they would give you a percentage of your income. So they were paying us like it was a small amount, but it was enough to survive on it. And I just there's so much time. There's nothing to do. So I poured all my attention into like really building web development skills. What's really interesting to me though is that you said you were a brewer and you managed to transition that into a tech career. Do you feel like the skills you learned as a brewer helped you in what you're doing now?
Well, funny enough, I think that this role and this kind of career really spoke to me because it highlighted all the things that I was lacking in this new brewing position I got. So I was given quite a leg up at this new job. I was basically in charge of the brewery, and it was a startup brewery, right? So there wasn't a much direct management over people, but maintaining schedules and maintaining like a much more complex inventory setup and also just the changing complications coming from new regulations around COVID. It was just a lot of coordination issues, and I found that I was really not good at dealing with them just because I'd spent all my time working with my hands and handling pretty simple scheduling. What was funny is that I had zero of those skills, but I really needed to practice them, and so I still was moonlighting with Raid Guild for the first 6 months in 2022 or 2021, and I think it was in a weird way a way to practice all these things that I recognize that I like, coordination and scheduling and timelines and all.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's just a way to practice, I guess.
So you ended up in a role that like kind of fit all the things that you weren't great at and you built yourself up there. What would you say is the most notable project that you've handled in Raid Guild? Like what got you from okay, I want to dabble in this and try to understand how it works to like, okay, I can actually do this as a career.
Um, I'd step back from saying I can do this as a career because I'm still trying to figure out how to stitch together all the pieces to make things work. You know, I think part of being I wouldn't say just a non-tech, but like a non-tech and also being new to the space is that we're kind of having to hustle to like prove ourselves and get enough skills to be worthwhile and really show our value in the industry. And so part of that, I guess I bring up is I'm still really looking for the thing that makes me tick.
Why would you say you've not found that yet? Is it just that you feel like there's still something that you haven't tried to do or you're still looking for something that really resonates with you?
I think it's a couple things. I hear a lot about imposter syndrome as I get older. I think I started first hearing about it like in my mid 20s, maybe or late 20s. And I definitely feel that coming into a new industry, even though it's like easily the most welcoming space that I've ever been a part of. And that's saying something because the brewing industry is the freest of flowing of information and sharing of secrets of any other industry outside of Web3 I've been a part of. But even so, with that landscape, imposter syndrome is real. And especially coming from someone who's not technical, where I see the ability to really create stuff via designs or code or smart contracts as an easy, not easy, but like a clear demonstration of value. And kind of the more nebulous of like helping coordinate projects and helping keep teams organized and on track and these more nebulous things, they are skills that I lacked, but I still think that my happy place will be at a point when I feel like I can construct things again.
I really want to take some time and talk about this because I've had this experience and I think that I've spoken to a lot of freelancers over the last few years. I made it a job to either help anybody that I see want to transition into freelancing or that has recently done so. And the common thread I found between everyone is this feeling of like I'm not in the right place because the way freelancing works is there's never really that security that you wake up tomorrow and everything's laid out to you like in a traditional job where you know your role, you know your place in a company, and you know what your output is. And if that stops, like, you know, somebody needs to be replaced, right? If you're on the assembly line and you're building an engine, you know that that engine needs to keep being built. But with what you're doing, there's like the technical engineering and then there's the social engineering. And I think that, not to toot your horn, but I feel like you're a good social engineer. You're able to effectively empathize with people, and that's extremely important. One thing I've noticed with a lot of the tech people that are in freelancing that I know, they are completely incapable of talking to clients, organizing between each other. They just lack that skill set. And if they were thrown in a vacuum, they wouldn't be able to make money. They wouldn't be able to do what they need to do because they need that other side of the, you know, the other side of the coin that completes them, which is, how do I talk to a client? How do I make sure that everybody's happy? How do I get the money from account A to account B? How do I make sure that everything's documented and presented and we are all on the same page? And it's a very difficult job. And I think that freelancing, if somebody chooses that as a career, they kind of have to understand, which I'm also working on, that it will always be a battle of like, am I good enough to keep doing this, or is it going to eventually run out? Am I going to get called out on it? And the feeling doesn't really go away. It's just you get better at saying, that's not true. I'm good at what I do. I'm able to do my job. I'm needed. And it takes a lot of like reassurance. I think it's a really difficult career path. I wanted to talk a bit about freelancing because, again, I have a lot of connections to people that do that. And what I wanted to ask you is like, why did you pick this type of job, right? Like, would you call yourself a freelancer?
Yeah, I think it actually kind of stems from far before like Web3 and my journey here, and really why we're talking. I went to college after high school when I got a degree in bioengineering, but I never really had the foresight of knowing where I was going with it. I just knew that I was really good at generally STEM type courses. And so I just played to the strength, not knowing what I was going to do with it. I graduated from school. I got my first job. I'm in a pharmaceutical development lab. And I got fired after like 4 months for safety violations because I was just not invested in the work I was doing and I was cutting corners and it just didn't fit. So then that marked basically my exit from the college career path, traditional path. I moved to Jackson, Wyoming, which is a ski town in the far west in the state of Wyoming. Like some amazing terrain, and I basically started my life as a ski bum. And much the same as I stitched together different projects in Web3, I had to stitch together different projects or different work in Jackson, in the ski town, to survive. The norm, at least back then, was you had 2 to 3 jobs to make enough to live on. And even beyond that, I kept on kind of finding myself gravitating towards jobs and opportunities that were more ad hoc and self-driven. So the brewery started off as a W-2 job, just a normal employee employer relationship that evolved to me becoming a contractor. And I was basically contracted to brew each batch that I made so that I could optimize my time and get paid for the value I created rather than the time I spent there. I also started working for a knife studio and made functional art for this company. And again, this was like a pay per piece model. So it was like all my own time. I was a 1099, which in the States is like a contractor tax identification, which means, you have the bigger responsibility of, negotiating your own healthcare and taking care of a bigger tax burden, but you also can write stuff off. I guess I'm rambling a bit, but I think what I'm trying to get at is I've always been attracted to the freelancing, maybe ideals is the right way to say it, of being the governor of your own time and being able to maximize output, and get paid on value rather than get paid on the hours that you spend within a company.
I can totally understand that. I've had full-time jobs in and outside of tech, and having a full-time job for me just it doesn't click with how I like to live. I feel strange when I have to get up at a certain time, do the same thing every day, clock out at a certain time. I find myself, even though it's like the amount of time I spend working is probably a little bit more, and the amount of money I make is probably the same. And I also have to do like all the tax stuff and manage a lot of different things. And there's a lot of stress involved, but I just find myself more comfortable and enjoying what I do. And I think that enjoyment is kind of why I choose to stay in this career. I've had offers to go into a traditional job, all of the traditional benefits. But even though, and I don't necessarily believe that it's slavery per se, but there's something inside of me that just wants to do whatever I want whenever I want. And I think that freelancing really gives you that opportunity. But there's that stress involved of when are you getting the next job, and how much do you need to survive, and is it going to come on time, and how are you going to make sure that you get paid for what you do? Because one problem I've dealt with a lot in the past, I'm very grateful not to deal with it anymore, but before I kind of knew how this all worked, I would always kind of get cheated out of payments. So I would do work for 3 weeks. So at the beginning, I thought, okay, you do the work and then you get paid like a normal job. You get paid at the end of the month or the beginning of the next month for what you did last month. And I would do the work and then the money never comes, or the client keeps saying, "Oh, it's PayPal is messed up," or "this didn't happen," and there's always these excuses. And I think a lot of people that are coming into this type of work experience these issues, and that's kind of where your job is important. Being an account manager is that you mitigate these issues for other people that are not equipped to deal with them. I wanted to ask you a bit about the challenges that are involved in freelancing, and especially switching careers over from something non-technical to technical. I know you said that imposter syndrome is one of them, and also trying to find your place. Is there anything else that you struggle with?
I mean, you hit the nail on like basically my biggest struggle and cards on the table. I've been trying unsuccessfully for the last couple months to actually find a full-time position because I was getting to the point where it was kind of untenable to continue on the path I was on just because with market effects, the work that was coming through Ray Guild was once very, very consistent. And, you know, I could actually depend on that for a full time job, even if I was only taking small percentage that I take off each project by being a cleric. But I was getting very stressed out about the here one day, gone the next kind of paradigm that exists within freelancing where I really, really wanted that security again of having, a set paycheck that I could make decisions upon and I could budget for the future. And if it wasn't for essentially, one client, the client that we work on, Pocket, coming to Ray Guild and continuing to give new opportunities, I think I would have been forced to maybe even leave the industry as a whole. So I think that's the biggest thing, and the thing that I will need to continue being creative about how to solve because I think I have some skills, but they are hard to transfer to other companies or other organizations. Or maybe it's not difficult to transfer, but maybe there's more people that have this set of skills out there, and there's fewer roles for the non-techs of this world. So I think that's basically the thing that's so keen that like I don't think I can think of anything else at the moment that's like a struggle. I think maybe the only thing on top of that, which I've definitely leaned on Opolis for, which
Mm,
isn't the best solution, but it's a solution, is just the help with dealing with tax stuff.
that's painful. It's a yearly pain. I
Yes,
get that.
it's super painful.
So I'll go into that a little bit because it's super interesting. The issue. So I had a kid recently, and you're aware of that. And when I had a kid, somebody that I know in my personal life offered me a pretty good job, or at least they offered me a chance at a pretty good job. Like I still have to go through the interviews and impress people and all that. And I still think about it, but at the same time, I'm also aware of this issue with, imagine that one day you have this 9 to 5 and you have an established job. You can still get dropped at any point. And if you are not ready for it, it's much more difficult than freelancing to bounce back, because when you're doing freelancing now, like you have maybe 3, 4 different clients in the past 5 years, those are still leads that you can pursue. Those are still people that know you and appreciate you, that you can either ask them for more work or ask them for referrals, which a lot of people are very obliged to give referrals, especially if you've impressed them in some way. Um, so with freelancing, in my experience, it's like the first 3 years is this huge mountain that you have to get over of patience, being able to manage anxiety and fear, your stress levels. But after a few years, you've established a list of clients and you end up in a position where you have more work than you can handle, and that there was always another opportunity right after the one you just finished. But you kind of have to get used to this idea of like, oh, tomorrow I might not have a job. I still think this every single day. I still say this to my partner. Like, for example, parental leave. If I had a 9 to 5 and I did it for a while, I could probably get a few months off paid or with the promise of getting my job back later to spend with my kid. But now the way I think about it is like, if I take a month off, my clients are going to have to move on. They're going to need to find someone else because they are a business and they cannot afford a pause. And I have to deal with that. And it's stressful and it's upsetting. But at the same time, I know that if I do the right things and if I make the right connections and I meet the right people and create a nice network for myself, that becomes your job security. But it requires a lot of proactive work, and it requires a lot of, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and help me, I'll help you. Which a lot of people are not used to that kind of thinking. So I can really relate to the challenges that you're experiencing. And even if you do end up getting a job, I still think that you've had a good amount of success from my eyes as somebody that I work with and I look up to, that you could probably do this for a while if you can figure it out. And it takes time. Now, I still haven't figured it out. Given that we're both working in a DAO. How did you end up in this like DAO space? You said you had a friend who got you connected. Could you tell me a bit about that story?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, yeah, thanks for the kind words, man. I definitely appreciate the feedback. I think just as a quick aside, I think that's one thing that we do pretty well within like the DAO space and Web3 in general is like it's a very healthy environment, very supportive. But it also comes with that fact that, there's no regular feedback or reviews, or, you don't have managers that are necessarily like creating that structure to give you that feedback that sometimes people really deserve and hunger for. So
The market is your feedback.
yeah, yeah, but the market's sometimes a bastard. So sometimes you don't want to think about that as actually the end all be all. But I hear you. Okay, so sorry, I totally derailed us. Could you remind me the question you want me to answer?
You told me that you contacted a friend who is one of the OG members of Raid Guild, or maybe one of the founders. I'm not sure I have that right. So you said that you spoke with them and they kind of introduced you into this world. What is a DAO to you? Like, how do you see this space?
How do I see the space? I see the space as in general very optimistic, which is definitely the most attractive quality about it. I still remember like the first conferences that I was going to in 2021 and being just blown away by just being in different cities around the world and being around people that were so wildly intelligent. Everybody that I meet in this space is really impressing me by the depth that they think, or the depths they go when they think, and also just their passion, because I don't think anybody really finds themselves into this world unless they have something that's driving them to this kind of fringy collective of an industry. And I think that also is optimistic when we come to the terms of talking about DAOs themselves. I think DAOs are rarely, if ever, true to the letter, or true to the letters, right? decentralized and autonomous. They all nail organization at least. But I think that it's less about the letter of the law than it is about the spirit. And especially within Raid Guild, I think the thing that I see the most is there is a general undercurrent or general structure of we're in this together and we're part of a group, and there is a sense of duty to one another within the organization that extends beyond we have a shared treasury and so we like do this work because we know that we're going to succeed as a group. I think maybe that's the story or the narrative on top, but judging by the fact like judging by the participation and like the ownership model of Ray Guild especially, I think it's just mainly it's this shelling point that gets people to work together and gives them an excuse to contribute to a common goal. I think humans generally just want to do that in general. And I think the DAO structure itself is just like a little bit of an allowance saying that you will be protected, your time will be protected, your energy will be protected, and you'll be taken care of if you do trust and put time into this organization. Just by the fact of having these agreements that are written in these smart contracts. Even if on the face, they're not guaranteeing, they're not really guaranteeing anything yet.
From what I'm seeing, by the way, is I've always been an international person. I'm originally from New York. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and my whole life I've always been in a different country. Like I'm constantly traveling. My family, I'm a generation immigrant. So my family is immigrants. I'm the first generation American, and we lived in Africa. We lived in Europe, and we traveled a lot. And I always found it difficult. Like whenever I wanted to go and work for a company, I see that traditional corporations and companies, they don't optimize for similar people. They optimize for, let's say, a shared goal of building capital. And I think that's kind of the trend in the West at least. And from what I see in DAOs is there is a completely different priority, which is we want people that have common goals to work in this organization. The common goal for the organization could be like in Raid Guild, a safe place for freelancers to find work and help each other. It could be in places like Uniswap to allow access to financial services to anyone in the world. But that common goal brings in these people with like this immense passion that if you were to go into a regular corporation, that passion gets crushed, and you need to be able to do what the corporation wants and what the corporation's goal is. It's not about like you finding yourself in a place where you agree with and you doing what you want to do. It's the other way around. Like the job in a lot of companies, the job is the point. So the job is like you are a software engineer, and that's kind of what it is, and that's where it's always going to be. With a DAO is you are a freelancer, you're a raid guilder, or you are somebody that is building the future of finance for anybody in the world. And I think that kind of brings out both the best and the worst in some types of people. If you look at something like, I don't remember what it was called, it was Tornado Cash, I think. Those people are obviously ideologically driven, and what they did, it's not necessarily a crime in itself, but they it brought out the worst in them because that passion unrestricted, because all of your peers agree with you and are trying to do the same thing, can land you in places where society is going to punish you. So I feel like in DAOs, at least for me, it's a place to go and work if you really want to do what you want whenever you want. So I feel like there is a lot of autonomy, and there's obviously a lot of flaws and a lot of issues. The lack of job security is the biggest one, but I feel personally really happy in it, and I think that Raid Guild is doing a really good job. I kind of wanted to do something similar to Raid Guild at a much, much smaller scale. So I look up to the way this organization has been set up, and I really respect it. Thanks for sharing your perspective on this. I really appreciate it. I have a question. So I looked you up on LinkedIn and I saw that you have a Scrum Master course. I think that was it. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, I took the course a couple of months ago.
How did that go?
It was good. I felt like it was quite easy, and I felt like, it was kind of helpful because I feel like I was exposed to a lot of those ideas, not knowing anything, right? Because I told you, like, I'm not tech, like, I don't have a technical background in software development. So, I was exposed to like these ideas of these weekly meetings and MVP and these iterations with clients. And those all just made kind of inherent sense to me. And so taking the course, it was like, oh, I get to learn the actual nomenclature behind these ideas. The one beef I have with the course is just that it was, online, and it didn't really have as much practical exercise as I would have liked. And that's mainly just because of how I learn. I think I learn best by, tactile or real on the ground experiences combined with classroom education. So, yeah.
Do you ever consider so I hear like a lot of the gripes that you have and the feelings of the imposter syndrome thing comes from a lack of tech knowledge. Do you ever think about like learning how to code or going into that direction?
Yeah, and I've taken different stabs at it over the years, or not over the years, over the year. One of my favorite raters and favorite people in Web3, Bit Beckers, he suggested to me a course, Zero to Mastery, on web design or web development.
I use that. I use that.
Did you? Is that so? That's what you spend your time?
Yeah, it's a bit more advanced. So I'm self-taught. I finished high school and I dropped out. Again, I'm not really good at doing that, like, gotta be here every day at the same time. But I'll share with you a resource later, and I think I'm gonna shout this out for anybody that might be listening. There is a course called the Odin Project, and it's completely open source and it's very hands-on learning. So with Zero to Mastery, when I started at least, I had a year of experience building out websites with HTML and CSS, and Zero to Mastery at that point was excellent. But you have to have that like basic knowledge beforehand because the video form content requires you to be because whenever a video is made about like how to do something, by the time you're watching it, even if it's a few months old, it's already outdated. So you need to be able to go and try to figure out where this thing is now. And, there's a lot more involved in learning video content than written and like project based. So project based learning is very important because you get that hands on experience. And it starts off as like, okay, you just build an HTML site, and then, okay, you start adding CSS into it. And you're doing all of this on your computer in an actual developer environment. So I highly recommend it to anybody. And that was how I started. And I completely credit that course for my career now. It was the best thing I ever did. I'll send it over to you later. I wanted to shout it out in the podcast. It's such an important life experience for me. I'm happy to hear that you've tried, though. I think that that's really important. It took me about like 5 tries to actually get into coding. I had a really hard time with it at the beginning. I felt really dumb.
Yeah. I think part of it is also I need to have a little bit of self reflection and acceptance that I'm setting myself up to be a keyboard warrior. And I have been for the last, almost 3 years. So I think there's a part of me that was hesitant to dive deeper, but I will definitely follow up with the Zodin, and maybe that's the thing that sparks the fire that'll carry me through. Because I think,
Maybe it is.
yeah, like the imposter syndrome goes away a little bit with, mastery over a subject, obviously. And then also, I think to be able to, speak the same language as the people you're working with is also really important. Being an account manager is fine and all, but if I can't answer questions because I constantly need to go ask for somebody else to answer them for me, then I'm not actually helping facilitate very much. So I think you might be giving me a kick in the pants that I needed. So thanks.
I'll surely follow up with you on that. I have 2 more questions and I will let you go. I really appreciate your time. The first thing is, what kind of advice would you give to people that are following in your footsteps and trying this freelancing stuff out? Like they're fresh into this, or maybe they took the plunge. They went from, a hybrid model of like having a part-time or a full-time and doing freelancing on the side, or somebody that just is jumping straight into that. What kind of advice would you give them?
My biggest piece of advice is that you should be very wary of comfort and of stagnation. I think that looking back over my past of all the different jobs I've had, the thing that like failed to serve me the most was getting into a position where I felt like I had total mastery over my little domain and I didn't need or want to grow or take on more responsibility. Thinking specifically about brewing, where I had a pub that I was running and I knew the system back to front and I could brew in my sleep essentially. And I, at that point, took on different jobs. This was when I started working for the knife company instead of like doubling down and learning more about the brewing process or learning on a different system or trying to reach out and coordinate with different brewers. So the long and short of it is I think the most key thing is to stay focused if that's what's serving you. And that's a harder thing. It takes a lot of self-reflection to know if you're actually like focusing on the right thing or the right skill set or the right company or the right project. But if you have that focus, then making sure that you stay nimble and stay hungry and keep exploring because no one else, just like we said, you have to kind of keep evolving in this world to stay relevant and stay successful. So I think that's my long-winded explanation.
One that was super relevant for me, and thank you for that. So comfort and stagnation, like they really are a problem because it's easy to fall into a life where you can breeze by 50 years without noticing. It is super easy to do that. And I've seen it in people in my life. But one thing I wanted to add on to that is the self empathy has been super important to me. For me, I was like super hard on myself, and that kind of helped me get started. But I feel like over time that wasn't good for me in a mental health perspective because I always expected way too much of myself way too soon. And I think that since I started to learn how to be empathetic with myself and to kind of not compare myself to other people, I've been a lot happier. And it takes a lot of work too. So, comfort, stagnation, try to avoid that. If you get to a point where you're there, maybe reflect and see maybe that is what's right for you, and maybe that's enough. And maybe you should focus your effort on your family or maybe doing some, personal stuff. And self-empathy is super important, is to just accept yourself, understand where you are, don't put yourself in front of other people because it's super harmful, especially over the long term. So here's my last question, and I know that again, this is a very difficult question to answer, but what would you like to accomplish in the next few years?
I think there are different answers to that based on the different areas of my life that I like to focus on. I think part of the reason I also feel different than most of the people in Web3 is I feel like I have a lot of pursuits that are outside of, what I would classify as the working world or working life. But if I'm talking specifically about what I want to accomplish in Web3 in this world, is I really want a project of my own. I think the attraction of having a job that could give me a little security, like that's attractive, but I don't think that's actually what I want long term. I think what I want long term is something that I created and I started and have breathed into life. And I've had a couple tries at this, and there's one right now that I'm working on with some friends, and I love it so much. I love the concept. I love the project, and I really wanted to see it living in the world. And it's just crazy enough that no one else is trying to do it. So I think we have a chance, and that,
Here's that, man.
yeah, that is the future. Is I hope that we can make this project a reality.
I really wish you the best of luck with that. A lot of like people here probably talked about my work for like 30 episodes. One thing I want to do in my personal life is learn to farm and learn to hunt. I've done both in the past on very, very, very small scales, and there's something so satisfying about it. And I think that like over the next few years, I'm hoping that I can get more time and space and start living a life outside of just being on my computer all day, even though I do like doing that. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really did learn a lot, and I feel like I understand you a bit better, and I also understand the challenges that a lot of people are going to be facing that maybe at this point I'm not really struggling with as much. So, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and hopefully, we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, I want to say a couple things. So first off, I want to say huge thanks to you for taking the time to talk to me and taking an interest in this topic and providing a platform, because I think the other hard thing about being a freelancer is the amount of information around to kind of check if you're crazy or if you're going through the same things as other people. So giving a microphone here is a really important thing, and I thank you for it. And and also I feel like a dumb, and probably goes to show how good I am at, like, you know shilling things, is the concept that we're working on actually is like, we built this because of our experience in freelance. And so I want to send it out to the people who listen to this, and for you to consider as well, is the concept that we're working on is kind of what I hinted at earlier in or early in our conversation, which is separating your value output from your time and getting you as a freelancer paid for the value you create rather than just the hours that you put into something. So just as a quick shill,
Chill away.
I gotta do it.
No, please do. And if you have links, if you're at that point, or if you're not, you don't have links yet, you can give me your contact and I'll put it in the description of the podcast. And I'll also like I run a real life community of people that are like freelancers and people that work in tech in general. And I think that anything that helps people in this category is super appreciated because it's kind of contrary to what the majority of society tells you, which is you go to school, you get a job, you get married, you die. And this is a very different life trajectory with a lot of challenges that people are not really sure of how to face. And, not everybody's doing it. So when you look around, you feel alone a lot of the times. So, links, please. If not links, contact and share the info with me in private as well. I'd like to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are live. You can play with our app right now. It's called Fux, and it's at fux.gg. That's fux.gg. And our hypothesis, our thesis, I guess, is that we would like to provide a platform wherein people can use their attention as the metric of their work. So if I am a freelancer and I have 4 projects, I use the Flex platform to assign the percentage of my attention that I allocate to each of these projects. We use it first as kind of an actual check on ourselves to make sure that we're not overextending ourselves, so that we actually sit down and think about, how much of my actual potential am I spending on these different projects. And then also the secondary effect of this is it kind of acts as a resource management tool for the ecosystem as a whole, or at least for the DAOs that decide to participate in our platform, so that they can look and see how much total attention is being spent on their work streams, and if the people that they're giving opportunities to or bringing on to do work for them actually have the capacity to do work for them.
I also see, this is a quick thing that I see the potential in here is for people that are high value that are able to produce a lot of outcome or can do critical things. It also probably gives the DAOs or companies that they're working with the opportunity to compete for their time in a more transparent way. So if they see like, oh, they're only really giving me 30% of their attention, maybe I could get it to 70, 80, or 100. And I like the idea. It's super, super, super cool. I've seen the website before. This is not the first time I've been here, by the way.
Nice, I'm glad to hear it, man.
People were talking about it somewhere.
We're on a slow burn. We came up with this idea like a long, long time ago. The first ETH Denver I went to was in 2022, And that was kind of like at the tail end of the big bowl. And I'd seen so many people, and myself included, you know, jump into like 5, 6, 7 different projects, and we're trying to like, contribute value all across the ecosystem because everything's exciting and everything's new and everybody wants you to come join their project. And people like burning out left and right, or they were, failing to deliver on their commitments, or they were driving themselves insane. So we thought that there was a need for, you know, at first this kind of metric to help people step back from that edge of overextending themselves, but also get a new paradigm out there, a new idea around how we how we spend our how we spend our value, how we create value, and what is the actual metric for that. So we're still working on it. I invite you to follow along with us, and we have some exciting integrations coming up in the future. We're talking with the Hats team. It was an amazing DAO tool project about integrating with their platform. We're talking about doing an integration right now with Raid Guild, and we have some plans for integrating with our other DAO tools friends within the ecosystem. So we hope to make this into something that's not so nebulous and pie in the sky, but actually something useful for people.
This would go well in something like D-Work, honestly.
And the work is also planned. They're really hard to get a hold of, though. So if you know how to get a hold of
They are so hard, dude.
them,
Dude, I was doing a raid what was it? D-Work and metagame integration. So we integrated D-Work into the metagame profile. So I built that. So basically, if you have a D-Work profile, you can just pull all the data and show all of the stuff you've done, how much you've earned, and what organizations you're in metagame. And we needed them to change like a or add a super simple thing to their API. And it was like a month of back and forth, and they just never did it. But I do appreciate what they've been doing, and I think that given the right incentives, they would probably help. And I think an integration with them would be very meaningful because Raid Guild has this thing where you can stake. What is it called again? Just a second. I don't want to waste too much of your time here.
stake and commitment.
Reputation,
Yeah.
reputation points. So you could stake reputation points in people. Whenever you finish a task, they give you 1,000 points, and that's the only 1,000 you'll ever get on the platform. And then you can find people's profiles and you can stake those points in them. And those profiles, like as a user, you can share your revenue. So I have a 1% share and I have 13,000 points staked in me. I'm the number one on the platform. But there's this massive gamification thing that could be going on there where companies can compete for the top contributors, and like you could allocate like how much attention are you able to give to a certain project for how much money. I feel like this platform has so much potential if somebody that cares enough to continue working on it takes does something with it, or maybe if it's open source. And I think that Fox goes well with this. I think there's a really good synergy there, genuinely.
Yeah, I think so too. So hopefully they're listening out there and we can get together on it.
Hopefully. Awesome, man. All right. And I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I'll get that link in the description. So if you're a freelancer, check it out. And if you need help, reach out to me or Sasquatch if he wants to put his contact in the description. Thanks for your time.
Oh yeah, man. They can reach out. And thank you again.
No problem.